Right. Let's see, a security session on domain controllers. So first of all, just a quick question, just a show of hands. Who has a security strategy at their organization, at their company? No, if you don't, good for you. There's a website, what the F is my information security strategy.com, so you don't have to make it up, they'll make it up for you. If you feel like this is last year's information security strategy, just get a new one, just like that. All right, it's on this screen because this screen isn't recorded, obviously. Could I get the presentation? Let's get started. Because we're talking about running domain controllers on HyperV and Azure. And this is a security session that I did on, and it's not just a security session, it's an awareness session as well, in Belgrade last year, where Romeo was present. And he said, well, I would like you to present this session in Croatia as well. So I thought, well, what could possibly go wrong? Here I am. All right. And I'm not from this region. I'm from the Netherlands, so you won't hear me speaking Croatian or Serbian or whatever your guys are talking. My main language is Dutch, but I get around fair enough in English. I do stuff for Microsoft Netherlands, and I do a lot of blogging. So all the stuff that you see here on these slides, all the stuff that you hear me talking about on the other screen is all stuff that you can also find on these free websites. Right, so what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the current situation and the challenges that you might experience when you're virtualizing domain controllers. It won't be pretty. It might be confronting, but at least you've got the information and you've got the possibility to act on it. The conclusion is the really unsettling part, but we'll get to that. So we're going to talk about virtualizing domain controllers on HyperV, just on your on-premises or in your private cloud stuff, and in Azure, which is Microsoft Cloud's stuff. And everything you see relating to Azure is also for Amazon and vCloud and stuff like that. But this is a Microsoft event, so we're talking about Azure and HyperV. And we're going to be talking about the solutions and picking the right solutions, if any. Cool. So let's talk about the current situation. What you see when you're virtualizing domain controllers is that it's not really our choice, is it? It is the stuff that our financial persons want to do. It's the stuff our CIOs want us to do, because they gain agility, it's more cost effective, and it's just, for most of us, it is a way of living, of doing stuff. Just a quick show of hands, who has virtualized domain controllers? All right, so about 80, 90%? Thought so, yep. And it's quite handy if you think about it. We've got physical hardware, we've got domain controllers on top of it, and if the host dies, it just starts up somewhere else. No problem. And if it's not that big of a host, we'll just bring in a new host and just drag and drop the VM there. So it's, I understand why you're doing it. I don't think I fully agree, but we'll get to that. Because domain controllers are pretty sensitive, in my opinion. There's the obvious stuff, people's usernames, people's email addresses. Email addresses are personally identifiable information. That's stuff that the law requires us to think about. And then if you make a domain controller an Active Directory integrated DNS server, it will store all sorts of information on DNS in Active Directory as well, for replication purposes, of course. So let's replicate all the websites that I visited throughout the network. Anyone in an organization with branch offices? Do you know all your domain controllers? You better. All right. So they're sensitive. So what we're seeing is that if you're virtualizing domain controllers, then you might think about performance issues. You might think about reliability issues. Stuff like snapshots. Who uses snapshots on HyperV or checkpoints or whatever they're called these days? On domain controllers? No. No. There's something that I used to be saying, and that was that there is one favorite method of mine to wreck Active Directory, and that is HyperV. It used to be vSphere. Now it's HyperV, definitely. If you're talking about virtualizing domain controllers, then there's stuff like security. Every document that you see from Microsoft that relates to Active Directory and domain controller security says it needs to be physically secure. How the heck am I going to do that? It's virtual, right? All right. Then there's the integration components that we need to think about because, and I'll talk to that a little bit more in a couple of slides, we need to enlighten VMs so that they don't get impacted in performance quite as much. But it does provide with some security challenges. And then there's, of course, there's backup and restore. So even when I have everything covered, my information security stuff, everything's covered, and I just let people walk out with the backups unencrypted, no, that's not going to fly either. So that's HyperV. And then, and this is the question that I ask any HyperV MVP, can I trust you? Can I trust you running my domain controller? I'm an Active Directory admin. I'm an Active Directory kind of guy. You're hosting my VM. That's nice. But can I trust you? You can do pretty awesome things with HyperV and vSphere, but can I trust you not to do that? Can I trust you not to take snapshots, for instance? That's hard. And in Azure, you know, I don't even know the people running Azure. Anyone know someone working in the Azure team at Microsoft? Thought so. I haven't seen a single hand on that question, by the way, so don't worry about that. And then, of course, if you're talking about Azure, and there's a lot of Azure sessions here, there's a lot of Azure sessions on Microsoft Ignite in Chicago next week, but what you'll see is that Azure is a really typical kind of beast. So it doesn't do IP addresses as we're used to doing it. So they don't do static IP addresses, they do dynamic IP addresses, and these days they do reservations, but that's kind of it. There's all stuff like cloud servers and storage blob, and I don't know that stuff. I'm an Active Directory admin. How does that relate to my world? And under the hood, and this is something that Microsoft does not tell everyone, but Azure completely runs stock Windows Server 2012. Not just for Hyper-V, but also for storage. They've got 2 new data centers in Australia. These are running Windows Server 2012 R2. So they're kind of testing it already, but that stuff is all Hyper-V. So why is that important? Why have I developed this session? Why are you here talking about me, rambling on Active Directory? Well, if it's personal identifiable information, then this is not just information security. This is your job security. If your organization is one of the organizations that is added to the list of Target, Bank of America, and all those guys leaking credit card information, leaking email addresses, leaking passwords, you might lose your job. Anyone here want to lose their jobs? Perhaps I should ask that session in another session. Oh well, because there's all kinds of stuff. The pass the hash and pass the ticket stuff. Anyone heard of that? Anyone seen it in action? There's pretty much, there's a lot of stuff. Benjamin Delphi, he's a French guy. He made a tool called Mimikatz. Anyone heard of that? Ah, a couple of more hands. Cool. Yep. I can just get all the stuff I need from Active Directory. I don't need a password. I've got hashes. Passwords are just, that's the stuff we see. It's like usernames. We see usernames, but a computer in the domain only sees SIDs. I'll show you. I'll show you. Because it is really easy. But we need to look at Kerberos first. Because if you're thinking about Kerberos, Kerberos is it is an open source technology actually. Microsoft embraced it and extended it. So Microsoft's implementation of Kerberos is not really conform anymore. So it does not conform to the open standard. They've added stuff like dynamic access control and claims in Kerberos and stuff like that. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But in its origin, it is an open source. And it works on Linux and Apple and stuff like that. So what you see is that if I have a computer and I log on, then I get a ticket granting ticket, a TGT. That's just a bag of SIDs. My own SID and all the SIDs that I've become a member of. Even when I've got nested group memberships and stuff like that, that's all in the TGT. So I get that stuff, and that is signed by the domain controller and given to me. Here you go, you've got a TGT. Now if I want to go somewhere else, some service of some sort, then I go back to the key distribution center, which is every domain controller in the Windows world. Then I'll just present my TGT and get a TGS. Just so you know, in the Kerberos standard, they've thought that through. So every KDC, every domain controller, every multi-master domain controller in Active Directory accepts TGTs created by other domain controllers. Because they know a shared secret, which is the password for the Kerberos TGT account. It's flaw number one, actually. So now I get a TGS, which is signed by the same key. All right? And then I present that TGS to the service and say, can I get access, please? Sure. You've got the right SIDs, so go ahead. So what Mimikatz does is that it helps you get that key. Anyone see a problem with that? I now know the shared secret of all the domain controllers. I don't even have to go to a domain controller or a key distribution center anymore to get a TGT. I can just make my own. Actually, it's funny because the guy over here is the one enforcing the TGT lifetime. So the golden ticket, the Kerberos golden ticket from the Willy Wonka show, what you see is that I can make any TGT I like if I have the KERB-TGT password. Any TGT. And there's all sorts of group policies that you can specify and create and say, well, you can have a TGT lifetime of 7 days. Oh yeah, and if the domain controller signs it, it will say, this guy has a lifetime of 7 days. Enjoy. All right. But if I create it, heck no. I'm going to make one that lasts 10 years. 10 years. I'm going to compromise your Active Directory for 10 years. Tell me, how does that feel? Some Dutch guy having access to your Active Directory for 10 years? Ooh. All right, so the KerbDGT account password are the keys to your kingdom. This is the shared secret that every domain controller uses to encrypt TGTs and TGSs. So if I know the password, I don't need to go to a key distribution center. I can just create my own. Actually, I can do all kinds of stuff. So if you look at the well-known SIDs, can I have a switch? Because Microsoft is so awesome. There's a knowledge base article that has all the well-known SIDs. So if I want to be, let me see. If I want to be the domain user, oh yeah. If I want to be domain admins, then all I need to do is add 512, just like that. All right. So what does that look like? Well, I've got a domain controller. I got it around here. Let me see. DC1. They already know the password. I got all that stuff. So this is the, let me see. Come on. Zoom it. I'm sorry. Where's my zoom it? It doesn't zoom. All right, I hope you can all see that. This is the account. It is actually called KRB TGT, Kerberos Ticket Granting Ticket account. And it says in its description, it's the Key Distribution Center service account. Well, service me then. All right. Then I've got a PC2. This is a Windows 7 machine. And on this Windows 7 machine, I have Mimikatz running. And all I do is ask Mimikatz, you know what? Just show me all the passwords. Just show me all the passwords. Move up a bit. Give me. I've got something running. Yeah, here it is. Zoom. Not that way. That way. Thank you. So here it is. And this is for the demo.windays.hr domain, username administrator, and password, very originally, password, but with some stuff in it. And when I look a bit further, I can see that there's a dc1.demo.windays.hr, and if I go even further in the output, then I can see all this stuff, which is just cool. But I've got an admin password, so I can just log on. This is the one you want to take a picture of. I can just log on to a domain controller. And then there's a neat command that says, let me zoom for you. Hold on. Let me try and zoom for you. Not that way. That way. Thank you. Let me just, you know, KerbDGT account has a well-known SID as well. Thank you, Microsoft. All well documented. It's the 502. Yeah. Please, after today, please refrain from commenting on bad quality of Microsoft documentation. Its documentation is actually pretty good. So what I have here is for the KRB-DGT account, I don't even have its password. I don't need its password. I've got its hash right there. There's a default salt. Well, that's original. And then there's the credentials. I got all that stuff right here. So I can just, let me get that. It's the other one. I want the other one. That one. Yeah, that one. Zoom. Zoom. Zoom it is giving me some. Not that way. That way. Thank you. So this is the command that I use with Mimikatz to create a golden ticket. So all I'm doing is saying, well, I want to do stuff in Kerberos. What do you want to do? I want to make a golden ticket. Thank you. I want access to Willy Wonka's factory. I'll make a user. I won't actually create it. It doesn't live anywhere in Active Directory. I'll just make one up because I can. It's called fake admin. For the domain, this is the domain SID. Oh, that's right here. Wow. For the KRB TGT with that hash, I'll need to give it an ID. This is the only check that Microsoft does. So this needs to be an account that exists. And it's funny because 1107 is the first RID that gets used for any domain user. That's not documented, by the way, but you'll figure that out if you go along with this stuff. Then I can add some groups. 513, let's start easy. Domain users. 512, domain admins, schema admins, enterprise admins, stuff like that. And I want to have it in a ticket called fakeadmin.kirby. Just like that. Let's create that. Boom. There you go. I now have a ticket that I can just inject in this session. And it says, well, I got a pack for you. I got it signed. I got it generated. I got it encrypted. I got everything that a domain controller does as well. Enjoy. Undetectable. Just a show of hands. Who reads the logs on their domain controllers? All right, undetectable, truly undetectable in this room. All right, let's switch back. All right, it's funny though, because the stuff that I'm showing you, this is quite hard. You know, if I run into a Windows 8.1 box, that stuff has protection for Mimikatz and stuff like that. If I have a Windows Server 2012 or 2 domain controller, that guy has protection as well, built in. But you know, as a HyperV admin, I can just see what's running. I've got integration components. Let me tell you about that. Let me tell you. I've got that stuff done, that stuff done, right? Yeah. Solution 1. If you want to cut me off of having admin access to your network for the next 10 years, then you have to change the password and thus the hash on the KRBTGT account. Now this is not as easy as it sounds, because when you change it, then you have all the TGTs and TGSs that are still allowed to live for, let's say, 7 days, which is the default value. So you have to change it, replicate it, then have all the other tickets expire, and then 7 days or a week later, do it again, because there's a fallback mechanism. Because you can't just change it and then say, well, all your tickets should just go away. Yeah, well, I was just backing up your active. Right, you can't do that. So I have to change it twice. Now, Microsoft has created a script, a PowerShell script. Anyone familiar with PowerShell? Not that many hands. Ooh. All right. And this was made available last February. So this has been available for 2 months. Scary yet? All right. And you have to run it twice. And you can download it from the Technic Gallery. I guess you guys are getting the slides, so then you can just click it. All the Mimikatz stuff, I know it's scary, it's not graphical, but you can click that one. And then, of course, you can use BitLocker drive encryption on your HyperV hosts. And you can use it in your VMs as well, just not for the system or boot volume. Just a question. When you guys make domain controllers, do you guys store the Active Directory database and sysvol and stuff in C, Windows, NTDS by default? Don't. Nope. Then you can't use this tip. And of course, you can use BitLocker drive encryption on your HyperV hosts. And Microsoft uses it in Azure quite a lot, so it's pretty useful. Encryption of backups. Treat backups like you would your domain controllers. It's a simple rule to live by. You know what? I think that slide on the other stuff is further along. All right. Let me see. How much time do I have? Oh, half an hour. Cool. Oh, this stuff is easy. All right. Let me get back on the... Ooh, that works. All right. So encryption of your backups. If you have a secretary or a office manager or people like that, you can give them backups and they'll take them home and store them for you. And that's handy, except when you give them last night's tape and then you need to restore it 2 days in advance. So probably most of the time backups get stored offsite after a week. And then people take tapes, USB disks, USB drives, in cars. Oh wait, wasn't that a British health insurer that leaked a lot of personal identifiable information through a USB drive left in a car? Little known fact, so did the Dutch military on pension data. All right. We had the perfect solution. There was a running joke 2 years ago. We said, we have to give military boomerang USB sticks. They always fly back. Didn't fly with them. All right. So the access control is, it's funny though, because if I have a HyperV host, this does not relate to Azure because you don't see that stuff, but if I have a HyperV host, then there's all sorts of VHD drives. That's the virtual hard disk for your domain controllers and your other VMs. What you'll see is that there's a couple of people that have mainly unrestricted access to those VMs. It's funny though, because we always say, yeah, system needs full control for backups. Heck no. I have a backup solution that doesn't even work with a service account anymore. It's just a filter driver. If I write stuff to the disk, it becomes part of the backup just like then already. So no, I don't need system. Administrators full control, yep. You can remove administrators full control. Doesn't help you that much because administrators, and they're the only groups that have that privilege, can always take ownership of files. So and even if you do restrict administrators on a box, in my book, my translation book, and I hope it finds a way to your translation books as well, into Croatian. If I read administrator, it says God on the box. All right. So administrators, that's not gonna do much. System, yeah, or the service account for backup, or the service account for antivirus, or the service account for anti-malware, stuff like that. That might be useful. Then HyperV administrators, that's the next slide. And the VM itself doesn't even have that much rights or permissions to its storage blob. Read and write. Can't even list the thing. Read and write. So you can change them, but note that the administrators always have access. These slides got mixed up. Yep. So there's a new group, a new kid on the block in Windows 8 and Windows Server 2012. It's the HyperV administrators group. It's a local group to HyperV hosts, and you can add people to that list, to that group, and then remove them from the administrators group. HyperV administrators no longer have take ownership rights. However, they do have access to all the HyperV features on the box. So yes, this can be very useful for delegated admins to certain groups of VMs and stuff like that. So you can have Active Directory or high privileged admins having access to the VHDs of your domain controllers, and normal HyperV administrators no longer. Stuff like that. You can play with that. It's a very powerful group. But note, if I have an access to a VHD or a VHDX file, as does the HyperV admin, let me just, do you guys work with VHD and VHDX files a lot? Because there's a new feature in Windows 8 and Windows Server 2012 and Windows 8.1 and Windows 10 can do that as well. If I have a VHD file, I can just right-click it and say, mount. See, Windows, NTDS, did. Thank you. Everything I need. So if someone has access to the VHD of your domain controller, he or she has access to everything. It might not even be that bad. You know, Romeo must have messed things up quite often, I think. So did Thomas, because he told me. But those oops moments, oops, I just deleted your domain controller. That stuff, that is quite easy to solve. Because what you could do is just remove the graphical user interface. Now granted, you can't do that in Windows Server 2008 or Windows Server 2008 or 2 yet. You have to install those boxes with Server Core during installation. Oh, here he is. Had any oops moments last week? No? All right. But with Windows Server 2012 or Windows Server 2012 or 2, you can install the box as you want, add any software that you like, do any configuration stuffy that you need. I want jumbo frames. That's hard on Server Core, by the way. And then, if you're done and it runs exactly the way you want it, you can just remove the graphical user interface. And what you get is a box that looks just like the boxes that I showed Mimikatz on. Yes, it does have a background. Yes, it does have the command line. Yes, it does have PowerShell, unless you're using 2008. And I can just do all the stuff that I need. It also supports remoting. So if I do want the graphical user interface on some box, and I have some clever multi-factor authentication that prevents Romeo from logging in when he drank a half liter of wine, something like that. It's not there yet. No, there's no solution like that yet. All right, but I can do that, and then get rid of all those oops moments with Server Core. We talked about the HyperV administrators. So let's talk about the integration components, because this is something that you cannot from. First of all, the integration components are wonderful. You can enlighten a VM, so it knows that it is a VM. Yeah, I'm running on a virtual host. Yippee! I think I must use the VM bus if I want a high performance. Yes, you do. All right, let's do that. Give me a driver. Thank you. But the integration components run as system. So next to administrator in my book, administrator got on a box, system got on a box but can't log on. All right, system. So the integration components are system. They can do anything. Remote block execution using PowerShell, using integration components, stuff like that. How cool is that? Can I get a switch? Because Azure has integration components as well. Look at that. That is This is a blog post from a technical evangelist in the US, from Microsoft. Again, well documented. It is a PowerShell script. Let me see where it is. He does some stuff. Here it is. And what he does, through the integration components. So we don't know any password on Azure VMs. But we have integration components. We have a portal. We have Azure PowerShell. This script will change all the local administrative passwords on your Azure VMs. Quite handy. Yep. A real lifesaver for some people. But for my domain controllers? I don't think I want to. So integration components. It's funny though, because by default in HyperV, the guest services, which is the box that is the last box, in HyperV that box is switched off, and in Azure it is switched on by default. So this is the stuff you can do with guest services. I can just do remote code, block execution, do stuff with PowerSploit. Anyone know PowerSploit? It's Metasploit, but in PowerShell. So I can do invoke-mimikatz via remote code block execution on a virtual domain controller through its integration components. It takes a lot of time to explain, therefore I'm not demoing it, but it's awesome. Yeah, I just want my KOB TGT. Well, other stuff is the operation system shutdown, of course, time synchronization. Anyone played with that, with Azure, with Virtual Domain Controller, time synchronization? Microsoft has now released its 4th version of the documentation on how to implement time synchronization in virtual environments. They don't even know themselves how to do it correctly. It's really awful. Okay, then there's data exchange, of course. There's heartbeat. So we can see if the VM is running or not. Well, the HyperV admin can see if the VM is running or not, so it's all right. That's all stuff. But if you're really running virtual machines, virtual domain controllers, make sure that box is switched off. You can't do it technically. You can check it in a VM. If it's on or off, but make sure it's off in Hyper-V for domain controllers. And the time synchronization stuff, because that might actually bite you in the behind. What you're seeing is that, yes, you can turn off time synchronization from the Hyper-V host to your domain controller. So your domain controller would just synchronize time for the entire domain behind it with a reliable time source on the internet. And it's quite useful to make your Hyper-V hosts synchronize time with the same reliable time source, aka not your domain controller. Then Microsoft, in one of its versions, said, well, just make that box go away. No longer do we do time synchronization for domain controllers. Yeah, well, that's quite interesting, because if I turn off a domain controller, a VM, and then start it back up, it has no clue about time. So the only way that a domain controller could start up in that situation is by asking time to the Hyper-V host. Oh, so this box only is when the machine is already booted. You can't turn this stuff off. It's the same with VM generation ID. You can't turn that stuff off. So integration components. Loads of fun. Read-only domain controller. Who has heard of read-only domain controllers? Who has implemented them? Good job. Because read-only domain controller, they have all kinds of read-only features. Read-only access to the database, read-only access to DNS and stuff like that. But I have another trick up their sleeve that is not quite as documented as I would like to see it. But what they have is they all have their own separate KRP TGT account password. So good luck. You now own a branch office for the next 10 years. Or at least until I replace the read-only domain controller, which is quite easy. So read-only domain controller. If you're not 100% able to guarantee that your host has physical security, use a read-only domain controller. Thought I had more time. Then there's Siski. Anyone heard of that? It's funny though. This tool does not only look like it's dated back to Windows 3.11, it is. This is, I think, but no one can give me a guaranteed answer at Microsoft. I think this is the only tool that still exists in the same way as it did in Windows 3. It's funny though, because it has an option if you run through it. So if you say, yeah, I want to have encryption enabled, it does NTDS.dit stuff and local SAM stuff. But if you do, then the second question is, how would you like to store the key? Do you want it at a password at startup, which is quite icky for virtual domain controllers? You don't want that, because your HyperV admin has to enter the password. But wait a minute, wasn't that? Yeah. And you can store the startup key on floppy disk. And if you think about it, that is actually quite useful. That's .vfd files in HyperV. You can put those somewhere else and give the domain controllers only read and write access, for example. Think about that. Floppy disks aren't that ancient. Or you can store the startup key locally. Yeah, which is just a barrier I can move through. So Siski, please, 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 if you make new domain controllers, after you make it a domain controller, before you make any new users, make sure you've run Siski. Please. I'm not going to demo it. But it's funny though, because all the solutions that I've shown you are technical solutions. And by now, you should already see looming on the horizon that technical solutions alone are not going to cut it. So if you want to have secure virtual domain controllers, either in HyperV or in Azure, make sure you have processes that make them secure. So make sure that you've thought about monitoring your event viewer, for example, auditing, backup, administrator role separation. On a daily basis, who logs on, not you, Romeo, who logs on with an account that has administrator privileges? And who uses an account that is a domain admin on a daily basis? I see someone. Nice. All right. All right. One last thing, because Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016 are on the horizon. In Azure, there's a feature, and that is just documented. It's called Storage Blob Client-Side Encryption, and it uses virtual TPM chips. Nice. So you can now use BitLocker on your virtual domain controllers. Well, that will make it much harder for me to gain access through integration. Oh no, wait, no it doesn't. All right, and then there's Azure Key Vault, which you can use for your certificate services, for instance, if you want to have public and private key pairs, but not on your HyperV installation, but in Azure, if you feel that's more secure. So this is stuff that, if you want to make your virtual domain controllers even more safe, you can look at. So coming to the conclusion, this is not a technical thing you can do. You need to have the entire organization running with you if you want to run virtual domain controllers safely, securely in HyperV and in Azure. And I think that if you have a choice between virtualizing or not virtualizing domain controllers, that choice might just need a bit more time and thought. So please give it that time and thought. Thank you.